Let us try to now understand the basic concept regarding the clean architecture with the DDD or the domain driven design over here. We are going to implement this particular architecture in our application, and let's try to understand how we are going to implement and what are all of the each layer that we are going to use and how they will be interconnected, right? And how we are going to make it as clean as possible, right? And once you search, if you go and search for the clean architecture diagram and all of this stuff, right, you will obviously come up with this particular circular image or the onion ring type of image or some kind of the layer type of the image, right? And here I have created one image which is in the circular design. You have the layer, right? So we have the you can see that we have a different layer over here that's defined, right? And we'll try to understand about it. Once you see this particular image, you may get confused, right? If you are not comfortable with the clean architecture, and you may get confused over here. Now obviously it's going to take time to get used to with the clean architecture, and even for me it was quite a bit cumbersome at the beginning. It was really difficult for me to grasp why this, why that, why I have to do that, right? So it was really confusing at the beginning for me as well, but slowly once I get started with it, implementing in my the real application, and then slowly I got the idea and how it works, why we are using this, right? So it comes slowly, right? It doesn't come by just seeing or watching this particular lecture. Okay, I got the idea and I know about the clean architecture. It's not always that, right? So you need to implement that, and you need to come up with your logics and why that, why this, and why that is done. You need to do some kind of research and implement in your own application, and then slowly you are going to grasp that particular the concept of the clean architecture, right? So it's not that simple as that we are going to say it's, oh, it's really simple, so I just have to do that, I just have to do this. And once you are going to implement it in your real application, you will get confused yourself. Oh, why this, why that, right? So why I'm doing that, it's coming from here, right? So it's really get complicated at the your project level. But that's the learning point, right? You get confused, you do research, and you get more idea about it, right? That's the learning curve over here, right? So it's not simple, it's not that simple. It takes time, right? It has a longer learning curve, I will say over here. But for now, let's try to see how we are going to implement this in our application, and what are the each layer that we will be implementing, and how they will be interconnected, and how we will have a separation of concern over here, right? As well as a single responsibility and of those logic, and how we are going to implement it in our application that we are going to build. So let us get started with the center of our, or the core of our application. The core, right? So core means the earth has the core, right? The center places, and our application will have the core as well, that will be in the domain. So this is the domain layer at the core, right? The color doesn't matter over here. Just remember, this is the domain layer, and it is the core of our application. It is the core logic. In the core, that means that code doesn't change. There is a rare changes in the code, and if you think of the earth core, it doesn't change. If there is certain changes in the core, then you will see there is some kind of the fluctuation. You will have earthquakes, tsunamis, and all of those stuff in the outer layer, that is in the earth, right? So all of us surrounding will have a really troublesome the consequences if the core moves on. If the earth core moves or it changes in a certain way, then it will show that it's going to affect in the outer layer, right? So similarly, here in our application, the core remains the same, right? The changes is there is always a changes in the business, but we need to remember the core is the one that rarely changes, right? There is not a like today you have this the core, or you have the core requirement of your business logic, and tomorrow that's going to change, or after 1 week that's going to change, or after 1 month, right? probably 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, you may receive some changes, right? So there is always a change cases, right? If you don't have a changes in your business, that means that it's not improving, or it's not growing, right? There is always a change case, but it's a rare, right? You need to remember about that one. And here we are going to put our domain specific entities, right? Domain specific entities, and we also have the domain specific exceptions. These are not going to change. The exception is not going to change this, right? It's the rare case that the exceptions, your exceptions logic and all of those are going to change. Your entities are going to change, right? So that we are going to implement in our domain layer. If that changes, that means all of the outer layer, if the changes is here, then all of the outer layer are going to get affected over here with the changes in our domain layer, because this is a core of our business, and if it changes, it's going to affect all of our outer layer. You will need to remember that one. So once you're defining this, we need to make sure that is the one that's not going to change, or a rare change is going to happen on that particular business entities or value object or domain exception or whatever we are going to create. And also we are not going to depend on any of the outer layer. The domain layer, it's a core, and so we are not going to depend on application layer. We are not going to borrow some of the model file or some of the files from the interface layer or some of the logic from the business application layer. We are not going to borrow anything, and we are not going to depend as well as the external frameworks like any of the external packages that doesn't come with the Python default, right? So we will be specifically defining entities, objects or classes or the exceptions, all of those that depends on the core of the Python itself. It doesn't depend on the external packages, like no external packages like the pandas, right? No external packages like the pedantic models or the like any of the SQL database connection and all of those stuff, right? So we are going to keep it core to the Python itself. If you implement all of those external packages over here, that means that has a external dependency. It's not a Python specific now. Python specific is always there, but it has a dependency to the external packages, and that is not good over here, right? So domain should not depend on any of the outer layer as well as the external packages over here. We need to keep in our mind, and with this logic we are going to implement our domain layer later in our application. For now, just remember that, right? It's not going to depend on any of the external framework or the packages, and as well as it's not going to depend on any of the outer layer like the application layer, interface, or the infrastructure layer over here. It's a core, right? The outer layer will depend on the domain, which is a core, but domain will not depend on any of the outer layer. And the next layer that we have over here is the application layer. In the application layer, I'm talking about this specifically for our application that we are going to build. We will have the interface, right? We'll create an interface, and we'll also have our core business logic implemented over here, right? Core of our business logic, like doing some kind of the calculation and extracting some of the values, whatever you are going to define, whatever your core business logic or the use cases there, right? So we'll be defining in our application layer, and it will reuse some of the entities from our domain layer, right? Or some of the exceptions and the classes or the value objectives that we have defined in our domain layer, we will be using, right? You can see the arrow, it's the application layer is pointing inward to the domain layer, which basically means that we can use what we have defined in our domain layer, like the entities, exceptions, classes, and the other classes that we may have, right? A code to our business logic, and some of the objects or whatever we are going to define in our domain layer, we are going to make use it in our application layer. So we are going to depend in some way to the domain layer over here, but we are not going to depend on the interface or the infrastructure. That's the outer layer from the application layer. We are going to depend on internally to the domain, but not to the outer layer, right? So that we need to keep point, as well as the same concept like the domain. We did not depend on any of the external packages. We will also make our application layer independent of our external packages over here. And it's depend on specifically on the team, or how your team is going to define the clean architecture and all of the stuff. But I would say from my point of view, it's only my point of view, right? It may be a point of the debate, but from my point of view, I would really like to keep the application layer independent of the external packages. Like I don't want to depend on the external packages like the Python tick model, or any of the SQL the objects, or like the data frame, or the pandas and all of those stuff. That doesn't come with the Python by default, right? Because once you have that implemented that in your application, you will have a dependency, external dependency, right? In case of later you want to go and change from the Python tick model to some kind of the different one, then that's going to change every of your business logic, or how the code is written. You have to go and override all of this stuff. So that's why I really don't prefer to go and make use of the external packages over here. I would always prefer to go and depend on the core of the Python itself, like making use of the data class itself and all of this stuff, right? So this is the our business logic layer, where we will write all of our use case, right? And use case, as I defined, say it doesn't change. There is really rare cases when the use case changes, right? The change requirement is always there, but as we call it, it's really rare, right? Maybe it changes in some time, some point, but not so easily, right? And this is the application layer, that how we are going to define. And here we will also implement the interface. That interface will be implemented in our infrastructure layer. We create the interface, and in the interface we will define all of our abstract methods over here that will be implemented in our infrastructure layer. Like if we are working with the database, we can have the get the user, update the user, create the user, right? Get a paginated record from the user, and get by the username, and all of those are a function that we are going to define in our infrastructure layer, right? Implementation. What we are going to implement in the infrastructure layer, what are the methods that we are going to use to connect with the external packages like the database or external APIs. We are going to define an interface here, right? And that interface will be implemented in our infrastructure layer. And here in the application layer, we will have a service class or a use case class that's going to also depend on that particular interface, right? It may be a bit confusing over here, but later once we are going to build that each layer, you will have more idea. For now, just try to understand the basic concept regarding the application layer. It only depends on the domain layer. It doesn't depend on the outer layer, and it also doesn't have the dependency to the external or third-party packages over here. We'll try to make it as clean as possible, though it may be a point of the debate, but for us, we will try to make as clean as possible by not depending on the external packages. But sometimes you may have some cases, right? You have to see how that's going to affect your team or your architecture that you're defining. That's the point of discussion. So after the application layer, we will have the infrastructure. In the infrastructure, we are going to define our repositories or the service class that's going to connect with the external packages. Like you may have the HTTP call or the API call to the getting the weather data, or connecting it to the like the external service, right? So you may have that, as well as you may have a repository where you are going to maintain all of your data connectivity, like to your local storage, right, or SQL database, and all of those are done in the infrastructure layer. It's a place where we connect to the external packages or external services, as well as the local storage. So you may have a remote connection from there, going to call to the some of the REST API, or connecting to some of the other services. And also we will have the local storage connected to the SQL database. We will implement that particular logic in our infrastructure layer, right? Because here we are going to depend on the external packages, like the SQL database connectivity, and defining our pedantic model, SQL model, and connecting it to the REST API, or defining our the token, JWT token, and the password encryption, decryption, and all of those are done. Anything related to the external packages, connecting to the external packages, external storage, are done in this particular infrastructure layer over here. And then finally we will have the interface over here, right? You can see the interface. And then we also have, okay, so let's go to the interface over here. In the interface, you will see that it's the entry point of our application. All of our endpoint will be defined there. We will create a schemas, that's a request response object that we are going to grab from the request, and what we are going to send out as a response. And we also have the dependency injection maintained in our interface layer, right? So we need to create a dependency injection, how we are going to do that, and all of the stuff will be done in our interface layer. So this is the outermost layer you can consider. It's a user facing. Anything that's come to your application will directly enter through the interface layer. It doesn't go directly to the application domain or the infrastructure. It always enters through the interface layer. It's the outermost layer, or the user facing over here. All of the endpoints will be defined in this particular layer. So I hope you got the idea. And let me give you one let's define one of the simple scenario over here. Let's say you are in a restaurant and you want to order some food. So you will call the waiter, right? So you will ask the waiter, please come here, and you will think that this interface is some kind of your waiter, right? So just it's going to take the order, right? So it's going to take the order. So user is here. So suppose you are here and the interface is your waiter, and you have the waiter will bring for you a menu, right? Once you go to a restaurant, it always brings you a menu over here, and that menu you can think of the application layer. So what you can order, right? So it will have all of the menus, whatever you want to order, or what can be ordered, right? Always meant if you want to order some kind of food that is not in the menu list, obviously nobody is going to do for that, right? Or the person who's going to cook cannot cook that one, right? So similarly, this is our menu application layer. Think it as a menu. The waiter will take the order from you depending on what is in the menu, right? Get the user, create the users, delete the users. That are the menu that you have, right? And maybe you say get the user. I want to get a user. So it takes that particular menu, sees whether there is that menu or not, right, that food can be cooked or not, and now it will pass that particular information to the infrastructure, right. Infrastructure is the one that's going to cook for you. Infrastructure is the cook, so it's going to do all of this stuff. Okay, so I have to cook this, right, I need to cook get user. So what are the requirements for that one, right? Maybe I need some ingredient, right, I need some oil, I need some masalas, right? So that's going to come from the domain. Maybe I need some masalas, right, I need some oil, and all of this stuff I can get some from the domain, and I need to get some from external packages. Then that's going to be in the infrastructure layer, and he is the one that is actually cooking for you, right, building the data, cleaning the data, getting the users, and once it's going grab everything and send it back through the application layer. Its menu is there, and then the interface is the one that's going to sub out to you, right? So think it as a simple logic over here, right? And interface will always go and call the menu, which is the application layer, and application layer will always go and pass it to the kitchen, and that person in the kitchen is going to cook for you. That is a infrastructure layer, and it may use some of the ingredients from the domain, right, or it may also go and get it from the this shop or some shop, grab this particular ingredient, bring it over here, right, I need to prepare this cook food, and let's send it out to the through the application back to the interface, and interface will send it back to the user. So it's really complicated, I got it, but try to understand. It's quite a long lecture here, but I hope you got the idea and how we are going to implement it in our application. Once we get started and start building our application, you will get used to it, right? So we will try to understand it by building the application, right? Just by reading or defining the lecture here, it may be a bit complicated. Let's implement in our real application.